Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, after the Roman Empire falls apart, you think Europe would be chaos. But there's this surprising new power rising up, the Franks. And they weren't the biggest or the fiercest of, well, the barbarians. But they built a kingdom that lasted centuries.
Yeah.
How'd they do it? That's our deep dive today. We've got a great interview with Dr. Ian Wood, a leading expert on early Frankish history. We're going to uncover their origins, key figures, and their impact, which, let me tell you, is bigger than you might think. Even if you think you know European history, get ready for some surprises.
Oh, yeah.
The Franks weren't just conquerors. They were shrewd. They were politically savvy,
Yeah.
good military leaders, and they even used religion to their advantage.
Yeah. One of the things that's so intriguing about the Franks is that their origin story is so different from some of the other groups we think about, like the Goths. They don't appear in history with this big dramatic migration.
Right.
They sort of emerge within the Roman Empire itself, almost as if they were already there.
Yeah.
And there's even a possibility that they incorporated some former Roman soldiers.
It's almost like they kind of popped up out of nowhere. Like,
Yeah.
one minute they're these seafaring raiders,
Yeah,
maybe even swimming in the English Channel.
that's right. There are early records that link them to the sea. It's really fascinating.
Then the next thing you know, they're in what we know as Belgium today. Even their name, Frank, it's a puzzle.
It really is. It could mean free people. It could mean fierce people.
Right.
But one thing's for sure,
Yeah.
it wasn't a single tribe. It was a confederation, a mix of different groups.
So you've got the Roman Empire, it's already struggling, and you've got these Franks appearing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're raiders, sometimes they're Roman troops.
Right.
It really makes you think, what was their relationship with Rome like?
It's a really good question.
Are they just enemies?
It's a much more complicated picture
Yeah.
than just barbarians at the gates. This fall of Rome was a long process, shifting alliances, power plays,
Right.
and the Franks were they were very good at navigating that.
And one of the guys that really stands out in this early period is Childeric. He's a powerful warlord, late 5th century.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really cool. We actually know a lot about him.
Oh, yeah.
Because in 1653, they discovered his tomb.
His tomb, absolutely.
And it was lavish.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, imagine being the archaeologist.
Oh, my gosh.
You open up this tomb, it's like, boom, Byzantine coins.
Byzantine coins, beautiful jewelry.
Intricate jewelry.
Even a signet ring.
Yeah.
Confirmed, this is Childeric's tomb.
You can really see how wealthy and how powerful he was.
Absolutely.
But wait, Byzantine coins? That means he had some connection to the Eastern Roman Empire.
It does, yeah.
Right. I could just picture him in Constantinople.
Well, there's evidence that he was actually exiled for a time, potentially even spent time in the Eastern Roman capital. Wow.
It really adds another layer to that complex relationship
That's right.
between these so-called barbarians and the Romans.
Childeric, he's connected to the Franks and the Romans. He really sets the stage for an even more impactful person, his son Clovis.
Clovis.
This is the guy that really takes the Franks to, like, the next level.
Yeah, Clovis is often depicted as this kind of, warrior king, embraces Catholicism,
Right.
leads the Franks to victory after victory.
Like divinely ordained.
Yeah, but we have to remember our main source for Clovis is Gregory of Tours. He was a bishop, writing decades later.
Okay.
Might have had an agenda.
Right. A little bit of spin doctoring going on.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, Clovis the Pious conquering for God,
Yeah.
But there might be a little more to it.
Right. What are we missing?
Well, for instance, Gregory really emphasizes Clovis's conversion to Catholicism as a turning point.
Right. God's on his side. Exactly. But there's evidence that Clovis was initially an Arian Christian.
Like the Goths.
Like the Goths.
Okay.
And his conversion might have happened later than traditionally thought.
So it's not as simple as it
It's
seems.
not as straightforward, no.
And his motivations are maybe a little more complex.
Right.
Now, I'm curious about this Arian Christianity. What is that? How's that different from the Catholicism that Clovis ultimately adopts?
Well, it was a branch of Christianity that was popular amongst some Germanic groups. And a key difference was their belief about Jesus.
Okay.
Catholics believe that Jesus was divine, equal to God the Father.
Right.
But Arians, they believe Jesus was created by God. So he was subordinate.
Okay, so big theological difference.
Big theological difference. And at the time, it had major political implications.
Right. So Clovis, he's complex. His conversion might not be as clean-cut as the story goes. Really makes you think about how religious stories were used for political power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it highlights why we need to look at our sources carefully.
Right.
And consider all the different angles.
Now, when you picture a Frankish warrior, what do you see?
Probably a big guy with an axe.
Yeah, right. Fierce barbarian with an axe. But Dr. Wood said that actually their primary weapon was the spear.
Based on the evidence from the graves,
Right.
spear was the main weapon.
And he also doesn't buy the whole, massive horde thing.
Yeah.
He thinks the Frankish armies were smaller and actually a lot more organized.
Yeah, it challenges that image of, barbarian warfare. You have to ask yourself, how did they conquer so much?
With smaller armies.
Yeah.
Right. Were they just better tacticians?
Maybe. Or maybe they were good at exploiting alliances.
Right.
Internal divisions amongst their enemies.
That's mystery.
Yeah. Real historical puzzle.
Yeah. And speaking of puzzles, let's talk about the Frankish kingdom extending under Clovis.
Okay.
This is where it gets really interesting. Clovis was on a roll, defeated the Roman general Syagrius, expands into Burgundy, clashes with the Alemanni, even takes a big chunk of Visigothic Aquitaine.
Yeah, it's impressive.
But here's the twist.
Yeah.
When Clovis dies, the kingdom, it gets split up between his sons.
It does.
And a lot of historians think that this was his widow, Clotilde's idea. So she's putting her son's survival above Frankish tradition.
Yeah. It makes you think about, what happens when you divide power like that.
Right. Instead of one unified kingdom, you got these sons all vying for control.
Yeah.
And this is happening as the church is getting more and more powerful.
Right.
Dr. Wood argues that the real transformation in the West, it wasn't just about, barbarian conquests.
Yeah.
It was the church getting tons of land.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting argument.
And the Frankish kings, they let this happen.
Perhaps not even realizing the long-term consequences.
So while Clovis's sons are fighting for the kingdom, the church is quietly building its own power base.
It's a different perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm really curious to learn more about how that happened.
Yeah.
And what impact it had on the Franks.
Yeah.
And, really the future of Europe.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to look at as we continue our deep dive into the world of the Franks.
Okay, stay tuned for part 2. We're going to delve into the church's rise, the struggles within the Merovingian dynasty.
Yeah.
And what all this means for Europe in the long run.
You can almost think of it as like a reverse Reformation.
Okay.
Like centuries later, the church loses all that land and power.
Right.
But here, they're gaining it, steadily gaining it. And the Frankish kings, they're not really, fighting wars all the time. They kind of let this happen.
So the Frankish kings, they're busy with their own power struggles, and they might have actually accidentally given the church the foundation for all that power later on.
It's an interesting way to think about it.
It is, yeah. And Dr. Wood actually said it was like a slow, steady investment. It paid off big time later. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. The church, they get all this land through donations, alliances. They even buy some of it.
Smart.
Yeah, and these holdings, they give them wealth, influence,
right,
and a kind of independence that shapes, politics and religion in Europe for centuries.
So while Clovis's sons are duking it out for control, the church is off building its own empire.
In a way, yeah.
What does this mean for the Franks in the long run?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing for them.
Okay.
It's more like they develop this kind of mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay.
The Frankish kings need the church. They need them to look legitimate. They need their help with administration.
Right.
And the church, well, they get protection.
Okay, so they both win.
They both benefit, yeah.
It's like this delicate balance.
Yeah.
But let's get back to those sons.
Okay.
They inherit a divided kingdom.
Yeah.
Ripe for conflict.
Yeah.
So what happens? Do they manage to stay in power?
Well, the oldest son, Theuderic, he turns out to be a pretty good ruler.
Okay.
And his son and his grandson, they're not bad either.
Mm-hmm.
They actually expand the Frankish influence even more.
Wow.
They even have power over Venice for a while.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So even though the kingdom's divided, the Franks are still a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm sure there was a lot of infighting,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
The Merovingian dynasty, they were famous for that.
Speaking of the Merovingian dynasty,
Mm-hmm.
can you remind our listeners who they are?
Sure, yeah. So the Merovingians, they're the ruling dynasty of the Franks from, roughly the 5th to the 8th centuries.
Hmm.
And they get their name from Merovich,
Mm-hmm.
who's thought to be Childeric's grandfather.
Right.
And this whole Merovingian period is super important
Mm-hmm.
if you want to understand the Frankish kingdom
Right.
and, really the foundation of medieval Europe.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So we have these Merovingian kings.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
All while the church is building up its power.
Yeah.
It's just this really complex time.
Yeah, it reminds us that history isn't just dates and battles,
Right.
It's about people,
Mm.
power dynamics,
Yeah.
the things you don't expect.
Right.
And sometimes it's these subtle shifts in power, like the church getting all this land.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of history,
Mm-hmm.
and with each layer we're finding out more and more surprising things.
Absolutely.
We started with this mysterious group,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about, the beginnings of France
Mm-hmm.
and how the church shaped Europe.
Yeah, it's amazing how it all connects.
Yeah, and the Franks, it wasn't just about France.
No.
They had a much bigger impact.
Oh, much bigger, yeah.
It's crazy to think how much of what happened back then still matters today.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still in the early days of the Frankish story.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
There's a lot more to uncover.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really intrigued by something Dr. Wood said about Clovis converting to Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
He said it might have changed everything.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought.
Like, what if he hadn't converted?
Right.
Would the Franks have gone with a different religion?
Mm-hmm.
How would that have changed their relationship with the church?
Right, yeah. It makes you think about those turning points.
Right, like one decision
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
could have changed everything.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just looking back.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to understand how things happened.
Right.
How one thing led to another.
And how all the choices and events led to where we are now.
Exactly.
So I think that's a good place to stop for part 2 of our deep dive
Okay.
into the world of the Franks.
Yeah.
But don't worry, there's more to come.
Yeah. We'll be back soon with part 3.
We'll look more closely at Clovis's conversion,
Mm-hmm.
how a new power rises up within the Frankish kingdom,
Yeah.
and the lasting impact of the Franks
Mm-hmm.
on European history.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We're wrapping up our exploration of the Franks, and wow, what a journey.
It has been, hasn't it?
We started with this group, kind of mysterious, coming out of the struggling Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're talking about the foundation of France, and how the church shaped Europe. It's amazing how these things they're all connected.
It really is a testament to how interconnected history is. The things that happened back then, they still affect us today.
Absolutely. And the Frankish story, it's not just, battles and conquests.
No, not at all.
It's about politics, religion, even a little bit of luck.
Right, and it challenges a lot of what we think we know.
Mm-hmm.
The Franks weren't just these, uncivilized hordes.
Right.
They were smart.
Mm-hmm.
They were good at military strategy.
Yeah,
And they really built something that lasted.
they did. And speaking of building, we've talked about Clovis, his sons, the Merovingian dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
But Dr. Wood mentioned this new power in the Frankish kingdom,
Oh, yes.
the mayors of the palace.
The mayors.
Who are these guys?
Well, at first they're not that important.
Okay.
They pretty much just run the royal household.
Okay.
But over time, they get more powerful,
Yeah.
especially when you have these later Merovingian kings
Mm-hmm.
who some people call them the do-nothing kings.
Nothing king.
Yeah, they're not really involved in governing.
That's not a very flattering title.
No, not really.
What happened? Why did the Merovingians lose their grip on power?
Well, there are a few theories.
Okay.
Some historians say it was infighting, power struggles.
Right.
Others think it was the nobles, the aristocratic families gaining influence.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably a bit of everything.
Okay.
But the result is the Merovingians get weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And that leaves an opening
For the mayors.
for the mayors.
So these mayors, they start out running the palace.
Yeah.
And they end up, well, taking over.
It's a classic power grab, isn't it?
It is. But how do they actually pull it off?
It's not a sudden thing.
Mhm.
It happens gradually. The mayors, they're good at making friends, building alliances.
Mm-hmm.
They play the different factions against each other.
Right. Smart.
They become the real power behind the throne.
Mhm.
Plus, they often lead the armies. So they have military clout, and they're popular.
So it's a slow burn. They're getting more and more powerful without, directly challenging the kings.
Exactly.
But there's got to be a point where they actually take over.
Oh, there is.
Yeah.
The turning point is the Battle of Tours in 732.
Ah, the Battle of Tours.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Martel.
Charles Martel, the mayor of the palace.
Stopping the Muslim army.
Yeah, he leads the Franks to a decisive victory.
This is the famous battle that stops the Muslim advance into Europe.
That's right.
So Charles Martel, the hero.
Well, this victory, it makes him a legend,
Mhm.
and it really cements the mayor's power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he never actually becomes king himself,
Okay.
but his son, Pepin the Short,
Mm-hmm.
he gets rid of the last Merovingian king
Wow.
and starts a new dynasty,
The Carolingians.
the Carolingians.
So from, minor palace officials to the most powerful people in the kingdom.
It's an incredible rise.
And then they start a whole new dynasty.
Amazing. It shows you how power can shift,
Mm-hmm.
how people can seize the moment
Yeah.
and change the course of history.
And Charles Martel's victory at Tours, that had huge consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Not just for the Franks, but, for all of Europe. It's amazing how one battle can change so much. What if he had lost?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
History is full of those what ifs.
It makes you think. So this has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from the very beginnings of the Franks
Mm-hmm.
to dynasties rising and falling.
Church,
The church's influence, yeah.
Clovis.
Charles Martel, just incredible.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, what's the one thing our listeners should remember about the Franks?
I think the main thing is history is always changing.
Okay.
The Franks weren't just, one thing.
Right.
They were constantly evolving,
Mm-hmm.
adapting,
Yeah.
shaping the world. They show us how complex power is,
Mhm.
how ambition and opportunity work together,
Right.
and how the choices people make can have a lasting impact.
That's a great way to put it. History is not just about, remembering dates.
No.
It's about understanding what shaped the world,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the people who made those choices,
Yeah.
and how those choices still matter today.
Exactly.
Well said. Thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the Franks.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed it.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into history.
Until then, keep exploring
Keep asking questions.
and never stop learning.